Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Pick Six podcast. I am your host, DPZ, and with me, my good friend Drake Magruder at Drakes_PC. This is episode 9 of the Pick Six podcast. Number 9. We've done 9 of them. We've done 8 of them. This is the 9th one. Sorry. Drake, we planted the seed for this episode and our past episode. But before we launch into that, our mutual good friend of ours, one of my best buddies in the hobby, Dustin, Sports Card Dad, as you would probably know him. It's episode 9. So why don't you tell us why 9's a big deal for guys like you and Dustin?
Yeah, so episode number 9. There's a certain player that we both love that played for the Saints that wore number 9, Mr. Drew Brees, and just as Dustin is, I would consider myself a Drew Brees collector. I think with things that we'll talk about today, that Peyton Manning for me is my number 1, but I still have a really soft spot in my heart for Drew Brees, and I still continue to pick up some of his cards and things like that. And so I thought, for episode number 9, and this was something that I thought about way back when. I'm like, well, when we get to episode 9, I'm going to share the Drew Brees stuff. And, when we get to episode number 18, I might have to share the Peyton Manning stuff. So maybe you can, with Griffey and that whole sort of thing. So maybe you can kind of segue in as well too. Yeah, exactly. So I grabbed a few things, and if it's okay, I'll kind of share and I'll kind of talk about them if that works. So the first one is his 2001 Credentials rookie card, and so this is in a BGS 9, and so it's kind of hard to see it, get a lot of glare and stuff like that, but this spot right here is real sparkly kind of in person, if that makes sense. And then it's got the acetate side over on this side, and so these are numbered out of 29, and so again, these are just called the Essential Credentials Future. And in 2001, they with rookies and things like that, they didn't have a now or and that sort of thing. They just had the future that, and so you just had that one kind of like essential credentials. You didn't have the future or the now and that sort of thing. And so that card was one that I saw. The previous owner lived in Australia, and I always try to figure out. I'm like, why would some guy in Australia have a Drew Brees card? It's kind of weird. And it was one of those things where he had picked it up in a deal and just had it, and wasn't really a Drew Brees collector, and so was able to make a deal for that one. And so that's probably my favorite Brees rookie that I have in my collection. So I wanted to share that today on episode number 9. The next thing is, and I don't have a lot of tickets, right? But here's a ticket. And so this is a signed ticket. And so this is from Monday, December 16th, 2019. And I'll zoom in on the flip here, right? So this is when Drew Brees threw touchdown number 540 to pass Peyton Manning on the all-time list. And so that's where he became the all-time passing touchdown leader until he was passed by Mr. Tom Brady here a couple years ago. But I just think it's neat because the Saints were playing the Colts in that game, right? Of course, Peyton wasn't playing for the Colts at that time, but they were playing the Colts, who was Peyton's probably most notable team he was associated with. And then Brees broke the touchdown record. And then not only that, he's also on the ticket, right? So they print these tickets like way, way before the season starts. And so it just so happened that the game he broke the record, he happened to be on the ticket because, they use different players for different games and things like that. So this is a signed ticket. I actually got this at my first national I went to, the 2021 national. I was headed out the door, and I happened to look over, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. Like, I don't really know anything about tickets or anything like that. And it was a cheap enough price. So I was like, hey, that'd be kind of neat just to have. And I love the connection there with Peyton and the Colts and that whole sort of thing.
Yeah. That dials everything together for you. Kind of ties it all in.
That does, for sure. And the last thing, I know we're going to talk about shields today, so I can't let the day go by without sharing a Brees shield here. And so this is from Leaf Certified Materials. What is this? 2008 Leaf Certified Materials. And so this is a full NFL equipment shield, 1 of 1. Obviously, it's game worn. But I just love how it says it's game worn, prime jersey, authentic. It's a mirror black material. And I just love the shield aspect of it and how it's not just like a cutout piece or from the laundry tag or something like that. It's actually the full shield that they wore on their crest there. And I've shared the story about that card, and I'll share it real quick. I won't go into the gory details, but that was a card it was the 2022 National in Atlantic City, and I wasn't there. I was watching from afar, and I saw a guy post it, and he said, and I reached out to him about it, and he said, "Well, I've already sold it to somebody else." I said, "Well, who'd you sell it to?" And he told me the person's name on Instagram, and I reached out to that person on Instagram, and he goes, "Yeah, I had it, but I actually just used it in the deal for another guy." And I'm thinking, oh boy, because it kept getting more expensive each time it transacted. And so I finally got in touch with the owner, and I expressed why. I kind of shared the story and what was happening and all that kind of stuff. And we ended up doing a cash and trade deal for it. But because it had transacted through a few hands, I had to pay a little bit more for it than I probably would have, if I had seen it a little bit sooner. So certainly, I think that speaks to, and we'll talk to a good segue on what we're talking about today. But when you see cards that you feel like you need and you have to have, and if your resources are there, certainly don't wait around and jump right in. So, anyways, that's the Drew Brees. A few things from Drew Brees for number 9 for episode number 9.
Well, that's great. So speaking of taking advantage of an opportunity to grab something that you've always wanted. You wanted this card, you missed out on it. You were the second bidder on this card a few years back, and ever since then, you've been bugging this person to get this card. You wanted it. He goes, you know what? I got a lot of interest for the card, so I'm just going to send it into PWCC Premier. And you're like, okay, fair enough. And you got yourself all ready to go. You got your popcorn out. You got your Coca-Cola. You set it over here, and you started bidding, and off you go. And it must have been a real exciting evening, leading up to the end of that end of that auction to see whether or not you're going to land the card of your dreams. And you ended up getting the card, and this is the card that you ended up purchasing. I think everybody knows at this point, since you shared it on Instagram earlier, that you snagged this logo signatures exquisite one-of-one Peyton Manning, sitting in a BGS 8.5 holder. The grade does not matter, although it must be a nice little addition to the card to have it grade as high as it did. The autograph looks terrific. The colors just pop out. This has got to be one of Peyton Manning's, if not his best card, one of his best cards. And it's in your collection, which is exactly where it should be. So why don't you talk me through? And so a lot of folks are going to sit here and go, okay, how in the world can someone like me afford a card like that? And I have a handful of cards that are pretty pricey as well. And why don't we talk about how people like you and I, who don't have a ton of expendable income, get ourselves into a card like this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to kind of pick this apart. So, the one thing is I've shared before, when I when I got back into the hobby in 2019, I was really following the herd, and I was, buying the Jason Tatums and the Lucas and the Kyler Murrays and, name your favorite flavor of the week, player that the influencers were pumping back then. And, you would get the card in, and then you could sell it and make money and that sort of thing. And that gave me a lot of anxiety and stress. But what I will say is, like, once I really zeroed in on focusing on Peyton Manning as kind of the number one player that I wanted to collect, I started to look at, well, what can I do with all these, liquid cards, commodity cards of players I really don't care about as much or have an attachment. And let me start moving into these Peyton Manning cards. And so I was taking those cards and moving into, what appeared to me, as kind of like rare and scarce Peyton Manning cards. And so I started picking up his finest gold refractors and his Bowman Chrome, like the gold refractors, and picking up his autographs and some patches and things like that. And I was using those type cards to move into these type cards that would sit in my collection. And so, So start building that collection, and it's things that I loved and things that I wanted to have. And I think that those are the things, when you look at, the types of cards, it's that if you love them, then somebody else probably loves them as well too. If you just like them because, do you think they're worth money or they're going to go up in value or something like that, that's kind of a tricky slope to stand on, I'll say sometimes. And so you've got to look at the cards and understand like why you like them. And with that. And so kind of moving past that, I just kept building out my collection. And at the same time, I'm saving money on the side, but I'm kind of one of those people sometimes if I have money, it feels like it's burning a hole in my wallet sometimes. And I have an urge to spend it, which is probably not the right way to be. But so you see a card like this and you think about what it might go for. And what I started doing, and I'll start here, and then I'll pause for questions, and we can kind of go back and just back and forth a little bit. But you start looking at your collection, and you say, okay, if I really want to make a run at this card, if I'm really serious about this card, because I think this is Peyton Manning's best non-rookie card. I'm very biased. I'm sure that others, in terms of a patch auto. And if I'm really serious about this card, what do I have in my collection that I could, is expendable, let's just say, for one reason or the other. It doesn't mean I dislike the card. It doesn't mean I don't believe in the card or the player or anything like that. But what are some things that I could do to kind of get into a card like this? And I actually keep a spreadsheet of all my cards. It's kind of from where they're at and like value wise and stuff like that. And I started putting things in the spreadsheet and kind of going down. And I wasn't just going number by number to try to meet a number. I just pulled the cards from my cases and safe and things like that and built a stack. And I just started going number by number. And then I went into that Excel column and just summed all the rows. And I was like, I think I can make this work. Again, the auction had just started. It hadn't ended yet. But I'm like, I really think that I could make this work. And so that at least put my headspace into a position of, hey, I think I can use my cardboard equity to make this happen. So
I think it's tough because I think as collectors we buy a card and we go, all right, this is going to be something I'm never going to sell. This is a card that will stay in my collection forever. It seems like a lot of the time we make a purchase, and for some people they're making run-ups to get some of the cards that you're now selling to buy this card. See, so there's like different stages, right? And I think it's difficult to reconcile this. And we've known there's been shows or podcasts or folks out there that have collectors out there that hold the opinion that if it's really a Grail, if it's really an important card, that you shouldn't be selling it so quickly. Or this is where I feel like it's a very gray area with the collecting. And I mean, if I'm really looked at as a flipper, I know I'm not, because I'd be the world's worst flipper as many losses as I take on these cards, because I wrap it all in the capital to buy the card and keep leveling up. And I've kept track of all my data, and I'm pretty much even right now, but I don't think I'd ever be even if I just would have exited the hobby and just take the cash and ran. I actually put it back into the hobby, put it back into some of these cards. So that allowed me to sort of I guess you'd say doubling down, tripling down on the hobby and on these cards and these players and these particular sets and all that. But you struggle with that because you go, well, wait a second. I don't want, and you and I were talking about this just before we hit record on this. For my situation, I'm like, yeah, there's a few cards that I think in a hurry, if I was in a situation where I needed to, I know which ones would go. And they're not like small cards either. They're bigger cards if I needed to do that. But that would be difficult, right? But they are cards I'd like to hang on to. Perfect world, right? I'd love to hang on to them. But sometimes if I'm going to have to go get something else, I need to have some capital, right? And so sometimes some of those cards you intended to keep fall prey to that, because there are going to be cards where you're just not going to sell them. And I have a handful of them. I'm pretty safe to say the Griffies I currently hold in my possession at this point, it would take a lot to move those cards. They're the last ones I keep. I think there's one Kobe I'd probably hang on to because it's so rare, and then everything else would go. And then just Griffey's, and that's all I'd have left. And I'd still be very happy. I'd still be very content. You know what I mean? But I think we kind of wrestle with that. Talk to me about that, Drake. When you're looking at some of these cards, you're like, okay, it's worth it to have this one card by letting go of all of these cards that I probably didn't at one point or time or another think I would ever want to sell. Because in order to get the kind of capital you need to buy a card like this, you're going to have to let go of some cards that are worth some money and that are sought after and that you may not get back. Talk to me about that. How do you reconcile that? How do you go through that process?
Yeah. So I think the thing when I take my personal collection to hobby court, if we call it, I start going through and I start evaluating the cards that I have, and I'm like, okay, what are the cards where if I let them go, I could potentially get back someday if I wanted to, right? And you take a look at like we'll just say a finest gold refractor. Let's use those. There's, in most cases, we'll just say, there's some years that are different, but let's just say there's 50 copies of that card. And I remember years ago thinking like 50 copies, holy cow, that's so few. You're never going to be able to find one of those cards, right? But then I think as you evolve in the hobby, you kind of learn that 50 cards is kind of a lot. Like 50 copies can in essence be a lot. And so you start going through that and you look at it and say, okay, which cards just based on, manufactured rarity could I potentially find again? And then you put those into a stack, and then you kind of start looking at them by grade, and you're like, well, this one is let's just take the Peyton Manning 2001 Bowman Chrome Gold Refractor. It's the copy I let go of is a PSA 9. It's a Pop 1. There's none higher. There's no PSA 10s. And so I start looking at that one and I'm like, gosh, this is a real tough card to let go. And it's a phenomenal card. If I let this one go, then, I'm letting go of the top graded copy. And that was a tough decision for me, but it was also one where I ended up feeling more comfortable making it because I thought, you know what, if I look at that card and I look at this card you have on the screen, I'm like, I'd much rather have this card all day. And if this card, as great as it is, can help me have the funds to get into this card, the exquisite logo shield, then that's a decision that I want to make. And, the fact of the matter is that's a super condition sensitive set, that 2001, and centering is off and things like that. But because there's 50 copies, there could always be another PSA 9 that pops up. People are still sending those things to be graded. Again, there's 50 copies. And so I started going through that route and looking at, okay, from a numbering standpoint, like I had some really great Peyton Manning stuff. His EX exceptional blue out of 100. That's a great card. It has like a jambalaya bubble look to it and things like that. But there's 100 copies of that. And, odds are that I may want to get something like that again in the future. But for now, it allowed me to move that to get into something like this. And then I started looking at my patch cards and my autograph cards. And I started looking at it and I said, okay, I'll take an example. It was the 20, I'm going to fumble this, but I think it's the 2014 flawless nameplate 1 of 1, and it has a piece of the N and the G in it. It's game worn. It's a beautiful card. But I looked at that and I said, okay, I can have this. I can also have this exquisite card and have both of them. But do I really need both of them? They're both 1 of 1s, both game worn. But I think when I looked at it, I said, I would much rather have this one that I got, the exquisite. And so I start going through kind of that route. And then from the autographs, I start looking at the autographs and I'm like, hey, there's an exquisite champion signature card. It's out of 15. Great card, beautiful auto. Like most collectors would die to have that in their collection. At one time, that was me. And so I'm not saying anything bad about the card. It's actually an auction. It ends on Sunday night. I hope somebody wins it because it's a beautiful card. But when I looked at it, I thought, what other than that it's exquisite and it represents his, Super Bowl championship, what makes that card special from an autograph standpoint? Is it just another Peyton autograph card, or is there something inherently special about it? And whenever I just kind of asked myself those questions, and I said, hey, there's 15 copies. It's really just another Peyton auto. Yes, it's exquisite. Yes, it commemorates a championship, but I think I could use that money to apply towards this. And so I started just talking through those things in my head, and that made it a little bit easier to from a consolidation standpoint. And I'll share one last thing and flip it back to you for a second. But the consolidation thing is one that I've wanted to do for a long time. And I couldn't bring myself to consolidate just for the sake of consolidation, to have a bunch of money in hopes that a card like this popped up. And so when I knew this was going to auction, I was actually glad for that, because it forced me to consolidate it. And it forced me to look at my collection and determine, hey, like, here's the 20 to 25 cards that I really want in my collection. And some people would probably say, man, 2025, that's a lot of Peyton Mannings. You should probably consolidate even more. But I feel happy with where my collection is right now. And and I'm glad that this piece came up to force me to go from, having, like 75 to 85 Peyton Manning cards in my collection to now having around 25. So.
No, I think the consolidation question is in it, and like I said, I'll keep pounding on the drum of the re-auditing of your collection, the repositioning of your collection. I'm doing it all the time. I just sent off. I was collecting the 97 finest, and I finally put most of it together. And I was okay. Now that I'm done with that, I'm kind of over it. Now I'm going to sell all of them, because I needed to get into this Griffey card, and so those were the cards that kind of fell victim, and on a handful of other cards that I had. And I looked at some of these cards, and I'm like, okay, there's 300 of them in PSA 10. 20, like 13 have sold already this year in auctions. I'll have a chance like twice a month the rest of my life, I feel like, to get this card back if I ever wanted it. So those are cards that go, I love how you think about that. That's exactly how you want to look at it. And it does force you to kind of narrow it down. And I always come back to, it's cool to have some of these cards. But having just a ton of slabs for the sake of having a ton of slabs, it just seems a little weird to me. I just rather have less is more, less higher quality cards that you can feel really good about. It also was nice because you also have these big pieces that, if you ever had to sell them for whatever reason, an emergency strikes, you really need the funds for your family or for whatever reason. If you have the right cards that your money's invested in like that, for the most part, a lot of those cards will hold good value too. They'll hold around where you paid, if not more, so that you can get a lot of that back if you ever needed to. There's always a lot of interest and demand for those types of cards. So, and as long as you don't get too crazy where they're worth like way too much money, where the common man, I like to keep cards that are worth money that people like you and I could buy, right? Because there's a bigger market of people and demographic of people that can afford, up to that amount, not like with just cash pulling out of the bank, but like they could probably do what you and I are doing, a consolidate to go buy if it's not out of control. These people buying super expensive cards, and I know the chat or the comment section might say, well, super expensive for me is $500. That's fine. Maybe that is. It's just different for everybody. It's different for everybody. I have cards that are worth that much. I have cards that are worth 20. I don't have anything worth more than 20K. And there's probably some people say, I have a single card worth more than 1,000. It's just all different for everybody. And that's fine. But just the general idea of having something that's worth a little bit more that you can actually, it's better to have cards that are worth in that range. You're going to have more of an audience to buy them. If you have these cards that are worth a ton, you're going to have a limited audience to buy them. You think about the Golden 100 and stuff like that. There's a limited audience to buy a lot of those sets or those cards, because there's only so many people that have that kind of money, especially right now. If you were to have to sell right now in the market that we're in, not a lot of folks have a lot of extra cash sitting around, especially to buy, a collectible or a card. It's just not going to happen. So you feel better knowing you're in that range. Now, there are certain cards and players. I have a couple that I know there's only a handful of people that would want to spend the money to get it. You have this Peyton Manning. There's a handful of people that probably want the Peyton Manning. It's not going to be as popular as a Michael Jordan card, but you're also going to be paying 4 times, 5 times as much for the same card as Michael Jordan than you are Peyton Manning. So it's all relative. I still think it's better to have less, but have the less cards you have be of more meaning, of more value. It may not even be value, right? You have some cards that you don't even know what they're worth, but they're worth something to you because they're so rare. they're so unique. And sometimes within the collecting community of that particular player, everybody kind of knows who has what. It's kind of cool. That's an exciting feature as well with collecting, is that you don't want to lose a card that may not be super popular and mainstream for that particular player, but within the collecting community, it's a big deal. And so you're kind of like that guy in the collecting community that has that card. There's something that's to be said for that. It's exciting. So there's lots of different ways to look at what you did. All of them point to a positive thing because you're happy with it, right? And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, is that you're happy with it. So.
Yep, exactly. Well, and just a few things that you said that I wanted to kind of touch on too, that I think could be important for folks is, one of the fun parts about collecting is setting goals for yourselves and going on journeys. And like one that I set for myself one time is I wanted to complete the whole run of finest gold refractors for Peyton Manning and Drew Brees. And so like for Peyton, it was 1999 to 2015. For Brees, it was 2002 to 2015. And I did that. And like, that was really cool. And I liked flipping through, my what's it called, the box, the case. That's why I couldn't think of it. And saying like, man, this is really cool that I was able to do this and, and that sort of thing. But when I looked at what cards to let go of, I was like, hey, I completed that journey, pat on the back. That was kind of cool. But what's my favorite years? And, it was 2002 and 2006 finest. Those are my two favorite years of finest. And so I pulled those out of the, stack of cards that was the run. And I set those aside and I said, you know what, let's keep these. So I decided to keep those. And it was one of those things where, we kind of go back to it is don't feel like you've got to get rid of everything, but just keep what's your favorite and understand why it's your favorite. And when you look at it, it kind of makes you feel something. And I think that's a reason to really want to keep the cards that you want. And then the other thing that's good too is when I was going on that run, there were people that were reaching out and they were saying, "Hey Drake, I'm looking for a 2007. If you ever see one, let me know." And so then I was able to go back and reference that list and reach out to some of those people and say, hey, if you're still looking for a 2007, I've got it for you. And that gave me the ability to, that's just one example. It gave me the ability to kind of reach out to people within the community and within the network and kind of make those quick sales, which were helping me, but it was also helping somebody else, find a card that they were looking for. And I think things like that are just really a win-win for everybody.
Love it, man. Love it, man. Well, that is going to conclude our episode for today. Thanks for joining us, everybody. As you always know to do, click subscribe, comment, like, do all the stuff. Talk to us below what you think. What are your thoughts on consolidation? What do you think? How do you go about it? I know we mentioned that in the past episode. Let's carry on that dialogue with each other down in the comment section. Drake and I will definitely be on there commenting as much as we can. But how do you go about doing this? Do you even do it? Are you really strict about how you do this? You see a card that comes up and you go, nope, I can't have it. I already bought the card I wanted. I'm going to stick to that. Is that your discipline? Talk to us about that. And there's millions of different ways of doing this. This is just one way. So I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks for taking time out of your day to listen to us. Subscribe to the Dustin's Sports Card Dad channel. You can find myself or Drake on Instagram at PC with DPZ or at Drake's _ PC. So again, have a great weekend, everybody. Be safe, take care of yourself, be kind to one another, and we will see you on the other side.